Hello and welcome again. In this third and final section of this week's presentation, I want to talk about expectations in the post-conflict process. That is, both expectations that are attached to criminal trials and expectations that are attached to reconciliation, and talk about some of the dilemmas that arise from the interaction between gender and processes of post-conflict and post-regime reconciliation and processes of justice. So let's begin by talking a little bit about trials. Uh, this is part of the analysis of trials that is offered by Julie Murtis in the article of hers that we asked you to read for this week. That is, there is an expectation attached to appearing as a witness, especially a witness to one's own lived experience in a criminal trial. And it is the expectation that is captured by the colloquial phrase that you will have your day in court. That is, that the appearance in the trial will be kind of a triumph, possibly a moment of vengeance, a moment in which the perpetrators will be confronted by your sincerity and by the sincerity of your experience with truth. And this generally does not happen in the environment of the trials. Expectations of satisfaction that are attached to the experience of giving evidence at a trial are not met. Why is this? First, there is a fundamental mismatch between the way that people remember their experience and the ways in which people want to tell their stories, and the legal procedures and language that are used to either obtain or to prevent a conviction in a criminal trial. The memories tend to become formalized, to become systematized. Elements are marked as important or unimportant because of their value for advancing a form of legal procedure. And this is a frustrating experience for people witnessing their own experience. Second, there is something about the dramatic arrangement of a trial. If you think of the trial as a kind of theater performance, if the trial is a theater performance, then the star of the trial is the person who is accused of the crime, the perpetrator. They are at the center. Everything that is said is about this person. The lawyers and the judges possibly play a second role. In any case, the victim, the person giving evidence, is always subordinate in this theatrical arrangement. It is the perpetrator whose behavior is at issue. It is the lawyers who are orchestrating the evidence in order to persuade the judges. So the victim is never the star. In a sense, there is a structural counter-narrative, legal counter-narrative, to the narrative that the victim comes hoping to present. And this makes the experience deeply unsatisfying for victims. There is further the problem that a criminal trial in particular is an adversarial process. So it is not a process in which people wanting to do truth-telling, to recount their memories and receive recognition for it, can do it unchallenged. It is the role of the other people in the courtroom to challenge them, and the adversarial setting of the trial creates conditions for provocation, for further abuse of witnesses. We've talked in previous weeks about the problem of re-traumatization, and very often the situation of giving evidence at a trial is a situation of re-traumatization. So these are some of the reasons why the interaction of gender with the atmosphere of criminal trials tends to be unsatisfying. I also want to talk about why projects of post-conflict reconciliation are also very often unsatisfying for victims for reasons that are related to gender. The first question that we want to raise is, when we talk about reconciliation, what kind of reconciliation are we talking about? What sort of reconciliation is the goal? Now, Alyssa Helms makes the distinction between thin reconciliation, that is, the ability of people from different groups that were previously in conflict with one another to live in the same geographic space without violence being the result, and also talks about thick reconciliation, that is, the kind of environment in which people from formerly opposed groups are able to develop relations of empathy with one another within which dialogue is possible. Most of the reconciliation agenda is oriented toward thin reconciliation, that is, to the prevention of future violence. But this is not what the carriers of sociability desire. They want to recapture the relationships of mutual assistance that characterize their memories of neighborhood and community. A second problem with reconciliation is the project of reconciliation is almost never a project of domestic origin or of local origin. It is usually a project promoted by intervention from outside. And intervention from outside means that projects arrive in the region with agendas. They are looking for people to carry out their agendas. There is money involved, there are organizations involved, the opportunity for travel, for consultation with governments, intergovernmental organizations, and so on. That is, the process of intervention can lead to an NGO boom to which people on the ground are likely to adapt. They will adopt NGO language. They will adopt or act as though they've adopted NGO goals. This can be accompanied by distortions in which the goals which people have for their lives are not reflected in their activity, but are replaced by the goals that are incentivized through money and other activity. We have seen some other things happen in the environment of, in particular, women's activism on the terrain of reconciliation. One of them is to the degree that there is a history of depoliticization, gendered depoliticization of public activity that dates from the period before the conflict and continues in the period afterward. There is a tendency, and this becomes a part of adopting the posture of innocence, to reject politics. Politics is the field of power. Politics is the field that is associated with structural violence that is committed through state agencies or non-state agencies that are assisted or organized or financed by the state. So politics is seen as the field of the immoral, as the field of destruction of community, and to be negatively gendered as male, in contrast to which there is the field of sociability, of reconciliation, of building relationships that is gendered as female. So these are stereotypes that tend to accompany projects of reconciliation, and the effect of these stereotypes is to depoliticize the activities of reconciliation. And a further problem that I have already mentioned is there are strong incentives for people to pursue silence, not to raise in the company of people from the formerly opposing group the reasons why there's a need for reconciliation, the reasons why there was a conflict, what people may have done, or what they may be considered as sharing responsibility for. And the activity of silence is almost never accompanied by satisfaction. So what can we say then about problems with the relationship between gender and post-conflict justice initiatives overall? Here are, I think, some of the basic points. The first is that the formal neutrality of law comes into conflict with the specificity of gendered experience, which itself comes into conflict, comes into intersection with a variety of other discourses, some of which are related to the ostensible goals of post-conflict justice, like reconciliation, and some of which are opposed to it, which are discriminatory and polarizing, like the revival of nationalist essentialism, which is also brought into contact with gender. So on balance, you can see that this is a complicating factor that becomes problematic, and it becomes more problematic because it very rarely receives the attention of outside observers, of analysts and policymakers who don't like to consider forms of social difference other than nationality and ethnicity, other than the visible ones that are regarded as being at the core of the conflict.